Well, good morning one more time. I want to welcome you to Landing Place Church. It is great to have you here. Whether you're joining us live today or if you're online or on demand or podcast, we're in episode 2 of a 4-part series on Ecclesiastes, and it's called Unsatisfied. We've been looking at the meaning of life. At some point in time, all of us ask this question: why exactly am I here? What is the purpose? What is the meaning? Is this it? Is this all there is? Is there something more that I'm missing? As we ask that question, we're looking for answers. In this series, we're trying to answer those questions. Today, we're going to look at a guy named Solomon. Solomon was super wise. He'd been given supernatural wisdom by God. He sort of emerged onto the scene when 2 women had an issue. I know, hard to believe, right? 2 women both had baby boys. They lived in the same house. We're going to call them Mom 1 and Mom 2. Mom 1, very unfortunately, in the night, rolled over and smothered her child to death. Quite accidentally. Horrific thing. She wakes up in the middle of the night and realizes what's happened, and she realizes that her son is dead. She takes her baby, she goes over to Mom 2, and she exchanges babies with Mom 2. Mom 2 also wakes up in the middle of the night, and she finds what she believes her baby to be passed away. Horrified. Worst thing that can possibly happen as a parent. As the morning light comes in, she looks at the baby more closely, and she goes, "This isn't my son." And sure enough, she looks at Mom 1's living son and goes, "That's my son," and they begin to conflict. They take their conflict to whoever you took your conflict to in that day, and nobody could seem to resolve this she said issue. No one could really determine who is the mom, who's telling the truth and who's lying, and so they brought these 2 women to Solomon. Solomon listened to Mom 1. Solomon listened to Mom 2. He sees the dilemma. He said, "I'll tell you what we're going to do. Somebody go bring me a sword. We're going to chop the live baby in half. And we will give half to you and half to you." Mom 1 says, "Yes, that is just. That is fair. That is exactly what should happen." Mom 2 is mortified. She goes, "No, whatever you do, do not kill the child. Give him to her if you need to." Solomon goes, "That's the mom right there. Give the baby to her." Because she wants the baby to live. All of a sudden, everyone recognizes that Solomon has wisdom above and beyond anybody else. Solomon goes on to write about wisdom. He wrote a book, and in the first 4 chapters, he talked about how incredibly important wisdom was. He said things like this: wisdom helps people live disciplined and successful lives. Wisdom teaches us to do what is right and fair and just. Love wisdom, and she will guard you. Solomon becomes the champion for wisdom. He becomes the Tony Robbins. He becomes the speaker. He becomes the expert. He becomes the person that people listen to on this particular topic of wisdom. How did he get so smart? He got so smart because God had given him a gift. One day he said, "Solomon, what do you want?" Solomon said, "You know what? I'm the ruler of Jerusalem. I have no idea what to do with all of these people you've given me to lead. Would you give me wisdom to lead well?" And God goes, "Not only will I give you wisdom, but I'm going to give you everything you didn't ask for. I'm going to give you wealth and fame and glory. I'm going to give it all to you." So here we are. Solomon is a guy who has everything in the world, like everything. But he's got a fatal flaw. We talked about this a little bit last week as we opened up this series. He loved women. I mean, he really loved women. He married 700 of them. Wow. Now, we could argue that some of these were politically slanted marriages. He would marry women of other countries to form an alliance. But on top of the 700 wives, he had 300 concubines. Concubines is not a word we use a lot. We would use something more like friends with benefits, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. He had 300 of those floating around too. Solomon loved women. Now, God had given a decree to the nation of Israel all the way back in the first 5 books of the Bible and said, hey, when it comes to marriage, one thing you do not want to do, you do not want to marry foreign women who worship other gods. It's not a law. I would tell you it's probably not even a rule. It's a warning. If you marry women from other countries who worship other gods, what's going to happen is you will get pulled away from me. I don't want that to happen. So please don't. Now, it's interesting, for as smart as Solomon was, for as wise as this man is, he makes a decision that goes directly against God's orders. He doesn't really say this, but it's as if he says, hey, God, I'm going to listen to you in all the areas of my life except this one. When it comes to my sexuality, when it comes to who I'm with, when it comes to women, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to go ahead and just not listen to you on this one because, I don't know, maybe I don't believe you. Maybe I just feel like doing this. Now, it's easy to throw stones at Solomon, right? But don't we all do this? Don't we all have areas of our life where God, hey, I trust you with salvation. I trust you with the really big things. But yeah, when it comes to this, no, not that one. And as a result, one of the saddest verses in the Bible is in 1 Kings 11:4. In Solomon's old age, they, all of these wives, turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God. Somewhere in Solomon's life, he goes from being on the top of the mountain, the smartest man, the richest man, the most powerful man, the most famous man who's ever lived. By the end of his life, he's a washed-up, grumpy old man. And he wrote the book that we started last week. The book is called Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes is a late Latin, early Greek word that is from the Hebrew word kohelet, which just means teacher. This book is essentially called Teacher. It's one man's look back at life as he gets older. And as we talked about last week, some books in the Bible are included because God says, I want you to do this. I want you to read this, and I want you to incorporate this in your life, and I want you to do this. This book is exactly the opposite, which makes it a little confusing. This is what not to do. Ecclesiastes is the person you don't want to be. It's Solomon at the end of his life, and it's kind of like he's lost everything. He has nothing left. It's like a country western song, right? Where the truck broke down, the girlfriend ran away, and the dog died. I mean, if you're going to put this to music, it would definitely be a country western song. And it's important for us to know that, because if we just read the book otherwise and we think it is something we should be doing, we're going to miss the entire point that this book is in the Bible for. The book is in the Bible as a warning, because here's what we know. History repeats itself. You know, I often get from people, you know what, I don't follow the Bible because it's so outdated. It's so old school. It was written thousands of years ago. Why should anything in this book be relevant to my life today? Times have changed. Culture has changed. This is out of date. And I'm like, oh, but is it? But is it? I would ask you to ask yourself that question today as we walk through life, Solomon's life, and what I want you to look back on and tell me if history doesn't repeat itself over and over and over again. So let's go to the opening statement from last week, because this is important for us to understand, particularly if you're just joining us this week. If you're just joining us this week for the first time, go back and catch last week, because it really is going to catch you up. But Solomon starts the book this way. After an introduction by the narrator, he says, everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. What do people get for all of their hard work under the sun? We talked last week, there's 3 phrases we need to understand here. The first word is the word meaningless. And meaningless in Hebrew is hevel. And hevel means vapor or smoke. I told the cafe if they were serving these kind of drinks on Super Bowl Sunday, I feel like it was a missed opportunity that they missed here today. That's just me. The Hebrew word hevel means vapor or smoke. And there's a couple implications with that. Number one, it's temporary, it's fleeting, it's going to go away, it's short term. But two, it's somewhat of an enigma, it's somewhat of a paradox. You think it's solid, but when you go to grab it, there's just nothing there. There's nothing there at all. It's so meaningless. And he uses this word over 30 times in this book to just say, life is meaningless. It's hevel. It's here and it's gone. It looks like there's something there, but there's really nothing there at all. Then he says, what does a man get? What do people get? What do they profit? What is the knowledge that they get? What do they get for all of their hard work? What do we actually gain? What's the advantage of working hard in life? Here's a man who's deeply searching for the meaning of life, and he's finding it to be hevel. He's finding it to be elusive. He's finding it to be like a vapor or a mist. It's here and it's gone. I can't get my arms around it. But the last phrase is perhaps the most important. What do we get for all of our work under the sun? The phrase under the sun is a Hebrew word that really means what do we get from a worldly perspective, a life apart from God. So by the end of his life, Solomon has turned away from God. He's turned to other gods. After all the success that he's experienced in life, he's now an old man looking back at his life, and he's saying, what gain is there apart from God? Once I left God, I can't find any meaning on this world at all. I'm not seeing it. And that's important to understand because, and we're going to learn today that Solomon is not an atheist at the end of his life. It's not that he doesn't believe in God. Actually, he blames God. He's angry at God. And that's going to come out. So Solomon, we jump into the next phase, and he says, you know what? I'm going to do an extensive search because I believe the meaning of life is found in wisdom. I've got more wisdom than anybody else. If anybody could find meaning in life through wisdom, it would be me. He opens up, Ecclesiastes 1:12. I, the teacher, the Kohelet, was the king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to the search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything that had been done under heaven. Now, again, this is no surprise. Solomon had written 3,000 proverbs by this time in his career. He had written over 1,000 songs. He knew everything about everything. Literally, botany, sciences, geology. Like God had supernaturally gifted him with wisdom that nobody had. Heads of state would come from other countries to sit under Solomon just to hear him talk about stuff, just to learn about things. That's how. So if anybody in the world could find meaning in wisdom, it was Solomon. So he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do an extensive search. I'm going to be thorough. I'm well qualified. And if anybody can find meaning in life through wisdom, it's going to be me. Cool. He came up with 4 conclusions. We're going to walk through them. And you're going to learn wisdom is not the meaning of life. The first thing he says is this. You know what? God dealt us a bad hand. We'll start right off. God dealt us a bad hand. Here's what he has to say. I soon discovered that God had dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun apart from God. And really, it's all meaningless. It's all hevel. It's like chasing the wind. What's wrong cannot be made right. What's missing cannot be recovered. Our family loves to play games. When we go on vacation, we took a family vacation in July. We packed an entire carry-on full of games. We don't need a lot of clothes. We just need games, right? We don't really love games of just random chance. We like games where you got to think a little bit, where you got to count cards, where it's strategic, where you got to think about it a little bit, right? We're probably a little more intellectual than artistic or athletic. All right, a lot. We're just not artistic and athletic. I'm not even sure we're intellectual, but you run with what little you got, and what little we got, we're thinkers. And so we like games where you got to do some thinking, where you got to do some challenge your work. And so when we go places, we just play games, and that's what we do. We particularly like to play cards. How many like to play cards? Anybody else? Any card players? Yeah. How many of you who ever played cards, you could just get dealt a really bad hand? Anybody ever had a really like no matter how smart you are, no matter how wise you are, no matter how well, this hand just ain't going anywhere. I can't do anything with this hand. It's exactly what Solomon says. He goes, you know what? God has, and again, Solomon is acknowledging God, but he's blaming God. He says, God has dealt the human race a bad hand. We don't stand a chance. We've been dealt a bad hand. There's no way to fix this. There's no way to repair it. It's messed up, and it's God's fault. And once again, I want to show you the clarity of this book for 2023. You don't need to raise your hands on this. How many of you think you've been dealt a bad hand in some area of your life? Maybe you've been dealt a bad physical hand. You got some illness going on. You got a sickness. You've got a condition. You've got something physically that you feel like you were dealt a bad hand. Maybe some of you are in a relationship right now and you feel like you were dealt a bad hand in this relationship. Maybe somebody in your finances and the way you manage money, you feel like, man, I got dealt a really bad financial hand. And one of the dangers with this is we begin to compare ourselves to others. Why am I here and this person over here seems to be doing great? They seem to have got a good hand, but I've got a bad hand. Now, I want you to realize Solomon, this entire book is how he feels about things. It's not reality. I feel like I've been dealt a bad hand. You know what? Solomon had the best hand dealt in the world. He had everything. He had money. He had fame. He had power. He had health. There was nothing that Solomon didn't have, and yet his perception at the end of his life is, I was dealt a bad hand. I'm like, Solomon, if you got dealt a bad hand, we're really in trouble. Because I didn't get any of those things. But that's how he feels. Why does he feel that way? Because he's disconnected from God. He's turned his back on God, and he said, I'm trying to find meaning in this world, and I'm struggling. It just isn't there. The second thing he learns is this: the more I know, the more it hurts. He goes on, I said to myself, this sounds like a little bit of bragging, but I think he's just that good. Look, I'm wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them, which is true. So, as the smart one, as the wise one, as the one who understands wisdom, I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all this is like chasing the wind. It's hevel. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. I went to college for pre-med, and my first couple of years, you just study anatomy and physiology. You learn all the bones, you learn all the muscles, you learn all the parts of the body, you learn what goes through every little hole in every little bone, and you learn all of that, and all of a sudden, by about the end of your second year, you think, you know what? I got this. I get it. I understand how the human body works. And then you start cell biology, microbiology, you start genetics, and you, all of a sudden, another world opens up on a molecular level that you did not know existed. And it's really discouraging because you realize you don't know jack about anything. It is the most humbling. You had just got to the point where you thought, you know what? I think I know what I'm doing. I think I've arrived. And then you realize I don't know anything about. I was so much happier when I didn't know what I didn't know. This phrase, what's this phrase? Ignorance is bliss. Solomon goes, you know what? It's better to be stupid. Stupid people don't worry about anything. The more you know, the worse it gets. You know too much. Solomon goes, I wish I weren't so smart. I wish I didn't know what I didn't know. I wish I didn't know so much. Because the more I know, the more I realize things are wrong. The more I know, the more discouraged I am. The more I know, the more disconnected I am from God. So frustrating. The third thing Solomon says is this. All right, I've tried everything from wisdom to folly, and I can tell you this. Wisdom does beat foolishness. Wisdom beats foolishness even on an earthly, under-the-sun level. He goes on in chapter 2, he says this, so I decided to compare wisdom to foolishness and madness. For who can do this better than I, the king? I thought to myself, wisdom is better than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness, for the wise can see where they're going, but fools walk in the dark. Solomon puts up a study and goes, okay, I'm going to study everything from wise decisions, really, really good decisions, wisdom on one hand of the spectrum, and I'm going to go all the way over to the other side of the spectrum and look at foolishness, and I'm going to figure out which one's better. His conclusion is this: even under the earth, even apart from God, wise decisions are better than foolish decisions. Most problems in life, Solomon would say, are self-induced. How many of you learned that? The worst things that have happened in my life, truthfully, and I realize some of the things are out of our control, are my decisions that were bad. They were foolishness. I made a bad decision. I suffered the consequences. Solomon goes, don't do that. How many ever tried to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night without turning the light on and you ran into something? Anybody? Not fun, is it? I was going to walk one morning. It was really, really dark, and I went downstairs, and there were people there, and I didn't want to turn the light on, and so I'm heading into our laundry room, and the door was exactly in my line, and there wasn't enough shadow on either side, and I ran square into the edge of it, like dead down the middle. Just about knocked me out. Would have never done that if light was on, right? Would not have run into it, would not have hit it, would not have been in a stupor. That's what Solomon's saying. He goes, look, even in this world, make wise decisions. Make good decisions, because foolishness will get you nowhere. Foolishness is a bad ticket. It's not going to help you out at all. Make better decisions. But then he came to this last conclusion, and I think this has frustrated him all the more. Yeah, wisdom is better than foolishness, but you know what? Death is the great equalizer. He goes on to say this in Ecclesiastes 2. Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish, they both share the same fate. Both will die. So I said to myself, you know what? Since I'm going to end up the same as the fool, what's the value in wisdom? This is all so meaningless, so hevel. It's like a mist, it's like a vapor. For the wise and the foolish both die. The wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool. In the days to come, both will be forgotten. Now, once again, I want to remind you, this is not reality. This is how Solomon feels. This is a grumpy old man looking back at the end of his life saying, I missed it. Because what's the reality? The reality is we're 3,000 years later, and we're still talking about Solomon. He was not forgotten. He went on. His name lived on. His legacy lived on. His lessons lived on. But we don't remember the fool at all. And that's really important because some of us feel a certain way today. We feel like maybe God has abandoned us. We feel like maybe God has dealt us a bad hand and there's no fixing it. We feel like all of this. But it's not reality. How we feel isn't the truth. Solomon was messed up in his thinking. And because his thinking was wrong, it threw everything else off. He was so frustrated at the end of his life. He tried everything. Next week we'll talk about how he pursues pleasure. The following week we're going to talk about how he pursued work and the things that he did and the things that he created and the things that he built. Spoiler alert, he's not going to find any meaning there either. He's so incredibly frustrated. He gets to the end of his life and he says these words, which I think are super sad. Ecclesiastes 2:17. So I came to hate life. Because everything done under the sun is so troubling. Everything is meaningless, like chasing the wind. 3,000-year-old story. I don't think anything describes our culture right now better than the line is, I came to hate life. There are a lot of people right now in America, you work with them, they're in your neighborhood, they may be in your household, it may be you, who if they really had to sum things up, they go, you know what? I hate life right now. I hate life because of this, I hate life because of that, I hate other people, I hate everything right now. That's where Solomon ended up when he turned away from God. He searched for meaning in this life under the sun, apart from God, and he could not find it and was incredibly frustrating, and yet he'd been given so much. In fact, he'd been given everything. Why is this so relevant to you and I today? It's so relevant because it wasn't despair that brought Solomon down. It was prosperity. The reason he turned his back on God was because he had enough. He had more than enough. He had everything that a person could want. He could afford any pleasure. He could do anything he wanted to. He had no accountability and he had nobody to say, Solomon, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think you should marry 1,000 women. I don't think that's going to take you down a road you want to go down. I think it's important to us because I know that we don't like to think of ourselves as rich. We like to think of ourselves as middle class. But statistically, and we've been through this before here at church, we're all rich. The fact that you live in America, you're rich. The fact that you live in this part of Denver, you're rich. Compared to the rest of the world, you are rich and you have lots of prosperity. And the danger in our prosperity is that we begin to focus more on the stuff that God created and less on the Creator. You see, Solomon, where he really went wrong in life, he got disconnected from God. When his focus shifted from the Creator to the creation, he started falling in love with the stuff God made instead of the God who made it. He started falling in love with the women. He started falling in love with the money. He started falling in love with the things that he could build. He started falling in love. I don't think anything could be more relevant to us today than that. Because I think if there's a danger in the church, if there's a danger in Christianity for you and me, it's the lure of beginning to worship the creation instead of the Creator. It's shifting our focus from God to the things that happen under the sun. I believe we talked about this last week. Why did God put this book in? This is such a confusing book. It's just a strange book. It's such a weird book. It's so backwards from every other book in the Bible. Why did God choose to keep this in the Bible? I think it's a warning for you and for me. It's the dangers of prosperity. It's the danger of having an area in our life where we go, you know what, God, I believe you in so many areas, but there's this one area in my life, I'm not going to believe you in that. I'm not going to follow you in that. I'm going to choose to do my own thing in this area, and I'll be just fine. And if we believe that, I feel like there's a day when we get older, we're going to look back at our life and go, you know what? This was all meaningless. Like chasing the wind. And God doesn't want that. And I don't want that. And I know you don't want that. It's interesting. There was another man 1,000 years after Solomon lived. He saw the same thing Solomon saw. He saw the same challenges. He saw the same principles happening in the world. He said the same thing. You know what? We've been dealt a bad hand. We were born into sin, and by being born into sin, there are challenges in this life. In fact, he went this far. He said, there's a curse on this life. But he came to a very, very different conclusion than Solomon did. This man's name was Paul. And Paul wrote these words in Romans 8, 20 and 21. He said this, against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. Because Solomon, I agree with you. There's been a bad hand dealt that none of us love. There's challenges in life that none of us embrace. There's hardship that all of us have to endure. I get it. But, best word in the Bible, but. Solomon said, and. Paul said, but. With eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. Paul goes, you know what? You're right, Solomon. The world's broken. Not everything is right. It's difficult sometimes. We're going to face challenges that are out of our control. But I'm going to tell you this. That's not where my eyes are focused, because I'm not focusing on this world under the sun. I'm focused on God who's above the sun. I'm focused on God who created the sun. I'm focused on a day when we don't have any of this problem. I'm focused on a different place and a different time. And that's where our focus should be. Two guys, same root conclusion, totally different path. One ended his life by saying, I hate life. And the other said, you know what? If I die, I go to heaven. If I live, I get to tell people about Jesus. I'm a winner either way. Two very different perspectives. When you get to the end of your life, which one do you want to be? Do you want to be Solomon, or do you want to be Paul? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. The things of this earth will grow strangely dim. The light of his glory and grace. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this book, and I thank you for including it in this collection of books called the Bible. God, we recognize this for what it is today, and it's a warning to us. God, we're probably all tempted to do the same thing Solomon did and to, in our prosperity and the ability to afford anything, to get caught up in the things of this world under the sun, whether they be money or work, relationships, any of this. And not that any of those are bad. They're just not worthy of our worship. So God, if there's an area of our life today that we've elevated above you, God, we pray that you would just clearly reveal that to us if we're unaware. I believe that most of us really are aware that there's some things competing with our heart for you. So God, we just bring those to you today and we confess corporately and individually that we've elevated things above our worship of you. There are areas of our lives which we've said, no, hands off here, God. You can have a lot of areas of my life, but you can't have that area. And today we just come and do what Solomon did not do and just confess that and say, will you forgive us for not heeding your warning? Will you forgive us for our rebellion? Will you forgive us for thinking that we know more than you do somehow? God, will you forgive us because Jesus died for that sin? God, we want to receive your forgiveness today. We're asking for it, not because we've earned it, not because we deserve it, because you offer it freely. And God, will you come into our heart and will you begin to do a new work? Will you free us from whatever holds us back from pursuing you fully, that we would look back at the end of our lives going, you know what? I lived the life that God called me to live. And now I'm looking forward to spend all eternity with him. God, we love you and we thank you and we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.